From Tumwater, Washington, going out to the 5 counties and beyond. No Shh, it's the TRL Podcast. I'm Chris.
I'm Annalisa, and we are your hosts for the library podcast that talks about more than just books. Hi, Chris.
Hello, Annalisa.
Adorable. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
I'm great. How are you feeling about today's episode?
I'm excited because I'm kind of a library nerd, as I'm sure that there are many listeners who are also library nerds. And this is a little bit of a peek behind the scenes as to how libraries operate.
And for people who aren't library nerds?
Oh, that wasn't enough information for you. That didn't clue you into what we were talking about. We're talking about, to use the library jargon, collection maintenance. So in episode 8, we talked about collection development, which is how do we decide what to add to the library collection and what not to. And we do add a lot of things. We ended up with hundreds of thousands of things across the entire library district. And this episode is going to cover, well, how do we keep track of all that stuff? How do we move it around? How do we make sure that what's on the shelf at a given location is what people want to check out? So pretty interesting if you're into behind the scenes looks at the library. And if you're not, I don't know why you're listening to the podcast really, but thank you.
Well, you know, even not as a library nerd or a long-time library person, long-time library user, I found that episode that we did really interesting about how you curate a collection. And so I'm assuming that this episode will be similarly interesting.
That's the hope.
Do you want to introduce our guests?
I do. And actually, I am so excited to introduce our guest today. And I want to take you on a little bit of a imaginative mental journey to introduce guest number 1. So if you're into fiction or films, you probably are familiar with a trope where you have a protagonist who's a seeker of knowledge. And your protagonist goes out into the wilderness and finds the tallest mountain and climbs to the top of the mountain. And it's an arduous journey. There's dangerous animals and inclement weather and rough terrain, and they go through all of this hardship to get to the top of the mountain of wisdom. And there's an ornate temple or something at the top. And they go in to the temple, and it's seated in the center on an elevated platform surrounded by incense of an elder sage, or an oracle, if you will. And we here at Timberland Regional Library, we have our own oracle. So if you're going into the metaphorical forest and finding the metaphorical mountain of wisdom and climbing to the top, you will see the administrative service center, which in this case is the metaphorical ornate temple. And our oracle of wisdom is our first guest of the podcast today, Mr. Ryan Williams. Welcome to the podcast.
I am.
Lovely to have you. And seated next to Ryan is his boss, and also now my boss, for whom I do not have a similarly grand introduction, Andrea Heisel, Library Services Director. Welcome back to the podcast from episode 1.
Right. Thank you. And that'll be going into your eval for next
I figured it probably would. So maybe on time number.
I'm disappointed, Chris.
Maybe on the next time, the third time you're on, we'll do something a little different. Okay. But you're coming back with more responsibilities and a different job title than you had on episode 1. Want to tell us a little bit about what you do now?
So my job description or title now is Library Services Director. So besides collections and IT, now I have the public services side of things, so the people in the branches. So I like to think of it as the total soup to nuts on how we get the collection moving around, how people are using it, how they experience things in our libraries and outside of our libraries with our digital collections and our online presence.
Well said. And Ryan, your actual job title is not Timberland Regional Library Oracle of Knowledge.
No
what is it?
Oracle of Knowledge. It's the really exciting IT administrator.
You've been around for a long time, though, and done a lot of different things.
I have, yes. Yeah, I started in libraries as a library assistant and have been manager, district manager, coordinator before my current position.
How many years total have you been with Timberland?
31 with Timberland.
Wow. There we go, earning the Elder Sage title there.
Oh, no.
And you're
now the Elder Sage.
I say this about you because you are someone that people look to for knowledge about Timberland and about the library world in general. And Andrea was just telling me a little anecdote when we were talking about this episode about how you had written an article 10 years ago, was it? Or predicting what the library would look like. now. Well, tell me a little bit more about that.
I'll let you tell the story because I think it's funny. Yeah.
It was kind of funny because I was going through old files. And so I had written this in 2011, talking about what is the library going to look like in 2021. And I completely missed the pandemic. So, that
nobody could predict that.
That got overlooked.
Didn't see that coming.
I didn't see that. But a lot of it is things that we see today in libraries. Attractive spaces for people to come, to access resources, to use a variety of devices, and talked about something we'll talk about today, which is systems that we now have in place that we didn't then for managing all of our materials and moving them around effectively and getting them to people. Mm-hmm. It was optimistic, looking for like, what do we want libraries to look like in 10 years' time? So there's a shift. Different libraries have different focuses. Ours is serving people, getting them access to information and resources, and that includes spaces, places to go, places to experience things. And we've really been doing a lot of that in Timberland. That's
kind of an interesting segue, because the subtitle that I've been either it will be the real subtitle of this episode or it's just in my head. But when we talked about bringing up this topic, we've been doing a lot of, like you said, enhancing our spaces. We have refreshed libraries, and we share those out every time that we complete one on social media, on our website. And every time there's a comment that comes up, which is, looks great. Where's all the books?
Yeah.
So this is the subtitle of this episode, I think, is, but where's all the books?
Yeah. Well, a good portion of books these days are digital. Mm-hmm. They're available electronically, and our circulation of those materials has exceeded our print circulation. So they're obviously not something you can walk into the library and just see, here's all these books, but there's an awful lot of books that aren't visible on the shelf in a variety of formats, whether it's audiobook or ebooks that you want to read.
And yet we still have over 500,000 physical things in the collection.
Yeah, it's a huge demand still, but what that looks like and the type of resources that people want of that has also changed. Mm-hmm. And so our library today is not an archive of all things. And so, some of the logistical challenges we have in a library is we're constantly buying new material. Like each year, millions of items get published. So we do have finite amount of space. How much space do we have on our shelves?
Well, because of our other topic we'll be talking about, we did find out we have 9 miles of shelving, which I think is really fun to know. Yeah. In my nerdy data mind.
We'll get to why that's important, actually, to know exactly how many miles of shelving that we have.
Yeah. But as large as that sounds, it's still a finite amount of space. So, as we buy new materials, new things come out, people want access to those, it is a finite amount of space. So we need ways to identify what we're going to use that space for, what we're going to keep there. Some items, we might buy a whole bunch initially when it's really popular, but then over time, we don't need as many copies of that anymore.
And that's known as weeding. I learned from our original collections episode.
Yeah.
So what's the process of weeding? We'll refresh our listeners.
So that has changed and is changing with our new systems. So we can talk more about how that works, but basically it's looking at like that, whether or not a title is continuing to perform, whether or not it's continuing to have demand from folks. Mm-hmm. It's really what it boils down to.
I think that weeding is maybe one of the more well-known processes that we do in the public library, because people understand that you get material, and then at some point you do have to get rid of it. They might not always like the choices that we make to decide what to get rid of, have differing opinions on that. Librarians have different opinions about that. I was hoping you could talk a little bit in a general sense about all the different sorts of processes that staff have to do to keep the collection accurate and make sure that, what's on the shelf is where we expect it to be and things like that.
So in 2022, we started a process of doing an annual inventory of our entire collection across all 29 libraries. So Ryan created a process so that they could easily go out to the shelves, scan each item on the shelf, and then that way clear up any missing or lost things that really were on the shelf or maybe were not on the shelf, and figure out a better system of which we are actively trying to find those missing items besides the initial search when we couldn't find them.
Prior to then, was there any sort of inventory done?
I believe not. No.
Not an actual inventory. We would get lists of things that, like, hey, we couldn't find this, and go take another look for it. Mm-hmm. But it was really on that basis, and you're only looking for things that somebody said they couldn't find.
Someone reported, like, oh, I couldn't find this thing. I went to go look for it to pull a hold, and it wasn't where it's supposed to be. So then you look for it. And
inventory. So the inventory goes into more depth, looks at the order of things on the shelf, identifies things that, maybe nobody had reported it missing, but it was in the wrong place, or there are other issues that were making it so you couldn't find it. So the goal really is that when you go and look at the catalog and it says, hey, this book by James Patterson is on the shelf, it actually is on the shelf. That it's true information that we're giving to people. Yeah,
you can false hope that you're going to get this.
Yeah,
find this item
that's there. Disappointing.
Yes, it is.
We don't want to do that. So inventory is really important. High use areas get inventoried more often. But yeah, we try to have at least everything inventoried each year, at least once, ideally more than once.
And when I was working in the branches, we had to run some of these lists where we would look for missing things or things that were lost in transit. And that's something that hopefully inventory is actually kind of cutting down on, right? So would you say that you've seen a kind of reduction in the...
Oh, yeah.
Overall? It's been a little while since I've been out there.
Definitely. So one of those things that we look at is like that. How many items have we marked missing? That has come down significantly. Today, we have far more information about where items are on each step of that process than we used to. So things like automatic sorting of our materials here at the service center. We know when that goes into a bin to be taken to a library, and we know which one it's in and when it arrives and when it gets processed, put on a cart and shelved. So like each step along the way, we know where that is now.
So I've been there where I helped a person go to the shelf to find something they were looking for and it just wasn't there. Yeah. And that's never the experience that you want people to have.
Yeah. Exactly. Like early on, we could say, oh, well, it was returned at Olympia on this date. Okay.
And then you get on the horn with staff in Olympia and like, oh, can you do a shelf check for this? And then you go out there and no, it's not there. And then you have to say to the disappointed person, like, well, we'll do our best to track this down and let's, maybe do an interlibrary loan from another system.
Right.
Want to wait a little bit longer. So yeah, this is all in the service of having a more accurate picture of what's where.
Yeah. And that's exactly it.
From someone who hasn't done this in a long time. It seems like inventory is kind of a lot of work. Is it a lot of work on an ongoing basis?
Yep. So it's one of those things, you can't avoid the work. There are tools to make parts of it easier and faster. So we've done testing with something called a live scanning wand that lets you go along the shelves and it can read the tags without you having to move those items and handle those items. Its accuracy isn't 100%, but as you repeat it, you catch different things. So with repetition, the accuracy is a lot higher than your first pass through. But that's not going to tell you if they're out of order, for example. So it's quick. It'll catch things that are missing, things like that.
You talk about reading tags.
Yeah.
And that is a reference to RFID tags, which is something that was implemented prior to the inventory. And we started doing that during the pandemic is when we started actually tagging things. So just for the fullest context here, before we kind of get into what we're doing today, talk a little bit about why we decided to switch from using barcodes to scan items with the little barcode reader, which everyone's familiar with, to adding the RFID tags to every item in the collection.
Do you want to touch on it? Should I talk?
So we did that in 2020, RFID tagging, to prepare us for our first self-checkouts for patrons. And again, because we did this process, it was a really great time to really evaluate each item as we touched it, to put the tag in. Is this something that needs to stay in the collection? Is it in bad shape? We don't want to tag things that are in bad shape or outdated and beyond our weeding guidelines. So we did a real good initial review of materials as we tagged those items and got them ready for self-checkouts, which also helped us get ready for automated materials handling.
Yeah, it was the next thing I was going to lead into. The machines that you may have seen in social media videos or elsewhere around our website that sort all of the items. You place them on a conveyor belt and it shoots them into the appropriate bins. I think it's an exciting thing to see. We have a massive one here at the service center, and that really expedites the process because it can read the tag in a way that it couldn't read the barcode.
Right.
And so you're automating a process that would otherwise take a staff person longer to do.
Definitely. So, all of this, it takes a lot of planning years in advance to get to this point. RFID technology has been around for decades. Like, it's not new. We weren't the first.
No, definitely not.
to go on that, but it was something, we were aware of. We evaluated, things improved. Costs of tags had come down significantly. So that was a factor too. When you're looking at more than 500,000 items, there's a cost with adding tags to all of those. So definitely evaluated all of that in looking at it, but it did open up these other opportunities. So our automated sorting, you can put the item on that conveyor any way you want, pretty much, and it will read the tags.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be right side up, upside down, or whatever.
Barcode placement, if you're trying to sort with that, is very specific, and you have to get it right under the scanner. If anybody's been frustrated trying to scan something before with the barcode, you've seen that. The RFID tag is a lot more versatile in that respect, and you can then implement these other technologies. Like I mentioned, the live scanning one, which you just can't do that with a barcode reader. Or our checkout stations now, when you go to checkout, you can put your stack of items on the checkout station, scan your card, and they all check out in a group.
Like magic.
Yeah, it's
like
great.
Magic that was available easily 15 years ago.
Yeah, it's great. But it just has improved so much.
Yeah, I think the thing that I always reflect on, especially working with Ryan, is how each of these steps along the way, we've been really measured and thoughtful around giving our staff tools to do their jobs and allowing them those tools to do their jobs. And so how do we help them figure out how to use the technology to make the jobs easier and to reduce the wear and tear on our bodies? Especially with the AMH machine and even now with IMMS, there's just so many ways we can improve that so that staff are freed up to have the more patron interactions, the more how can we help you find what you need at a different level than just I'm just shelving books all day long and that's my only job. That's no longer how we work at this system.
So you just said something that we've been building up to, and I think you should maybe explain, which is the word IMMS, which you've now used. What does IMMS mean?
It's the next step of, collection, inventory maintenance, how we think about collections, the patron experience around that. It stands for Intelligent Material Management Software. And over those years of trying to get to this place, Ryan and I and the selectors have looked at different tools we could use to help manage the collection more efficiently. So not requiring the staff to have so much time to figure out, is this book still, within our guidelines? Do we need to keep it? How do we manage when our shelves are overfull in a particular area? All of the things that have always just kind of driven us crazy because it's like, what is the answer? We need this answer. And this tool is now giving us kind of the answer.
I think a lot of folks by now realized with a system like Timberland is that we share the materials across the libraries. So you can return something and it stays at that library so somebody there can check that out. And that's great. And it introduces more variety into the collection. You get to see things. You don't just go into your library and see the same set of books on the shelf every time you're there. And so you try to peruse the new bookshelf, hoping there's something new that will be interested. So the collection is dynamic, it's moving, all of that, which is great. But then sometimes you get too much in one library, or you don't get enough in another library. If your library's further off the beaten path, so people aren't returning as much there, things like that. And so again, this was one of those, we tried to balance that manually. I need more of this. I have too much of this type of thing, exchanging material. And so one of the things that this software does is it brings a lot of data and information to making that decision tree of whether or not that item is actually going to stay at that library. And so part of configuring and setting all that up was calculating the 9 miles of shelving, mapping all that out, and what is going on each of those shelves.
What I find interesting about it is that we have the data about the items. Like it's something that we can access, but if we were to try and do that manually or like shift things around and respond to people's requests that I'm out in this library and I don't have enough DVDs, or I have too many DVDs, or I don't have enough dinosaur books, or I have too many dinosaur books, which is actually not a problem anyone will ever report. But, getting that stuff moved around it's not an impossible task without the aid of software. It's just a very time-intensive task. Would you agree with that to to get that
to evaluate all of those titles and figure out like where's the best place to put it. IMMS does it like that. So when we get an item back, it's saying, okay, this library has space for the item, has demand for the item. Nobody else is needing it more than this library, so we're going to go ahead and let it stay here. Or it's making other comparisons. It's like, this library over here really needs more dinosaur books. Everybody needs more dinosaur books.
It's a pretty common demand. What can you say? That's the best example we got.
But this one in particular needs, they have the greatest need right now for that. So even though it could have stayed here, I'm going to send it to Tenino because Tenino is really desperately short right now.
The way you describe it reminds me of an algorithm.
It is.
So maybe that was obvious to everyone, but it reminds me of, it's like on the internet where figuring out what you're interested in, what you would like to see more of, and placing that in front of you. And so this IMMS kind of reminds me of an algorithm of getting the materials where they think the demand is in need or where there's not enough of that. And did I just sum it up?
Yeah.
Episode over.
All right. Yeah, we're done.
It's great. An algorithm.
It is. It's a decision tree that it makes really fast. And it has, so some of the things I mentioned earlier about like how we're able to know where items are in that process and moving around the district from being returned, sorted, shelved, all of those things, IMMS is doing that. So that's how we're able to keep track of it. So now the tags are not just on the books, they're on our boxes that we use to transport material, they're on our shelving carts. And the staff use a mobile app that on a phone that can scan those tags. So they can quickly scan a tag, say, I'm going to put this on this specific cart. Now the system knows, okay, these items are on that cart.
I think a key point to it is that it does know how much shelving that we have. And so then how full the shelves are, because it's assigning a width to each of the items. It may not be the exact width, but like it knows how full a shelf is at a given branch. And so it's taking that into account when it's deciding where to send the material around the district. And I think that's a really kind of like fascinating element of this, is that, yeah, we measured all of the shelves. And so, you know, to what you were saying earlier, if we recently remodeled or renovated a branch, there's a collection component to that. So this is something that, like you said, people have said like, oh, it looks real nice in here, but it seems like there's just not a lot of books on the shelf. And with IMMS, the idea is that it knows how full the shelves are. And so it can send more material to a location where the shelves are maybe a little more empty, and move that from someplace where they're over full, as it were. And it's something only recently implemented. So I was hoping you could speak to that a little bit. Like, I think that's an important element of why we started using IMMS in the first place, or wanted to take advantage of this kind of software, because it's important to make sure that what's on the shelf for people who like to browse meets their interests and is responsive to it, and that we are actually, you know, filling the shelves with material that speaks to the needs of that community.
Yeah. So when Ryan talked about we share items among the 29 libraries, we call that floating. And there's always been a lot of conversation in the library world about floating. And is it good? Is it bad? Does it work? Does it not work? I see it on the national level and have seen it for many years now. And I feel like we found the answer, which I'm very excited about, obviously. But the idea that, so the branches all have still local control of what's on their shelves, but we also look at circulation usage of each item location. Like, are more people checking out those dinosaur books? Do you need more room for that? Let's make more space on your shelf for large print if that's the predominant need there. So there's a lot of information that local libraries can make about what's on their shelves. And if we think about it that way and adjust over time, then they should always be responding to what their local community reading interests are or access interests are. So that's the beauty of the system, where before we felt like, yeah, floating is working out great in some ways, but obviously it's a problem when, say, they have nothing on their shelves in this particular subject area. And so this alleviates that problem, because it says, oh, there's space and you've mapped that you need this type of material on your shelves, and now we're going to send it to you. So I'm really excited. In another year, we're going to have so much more information about how it's performing, and hoping to see an increased use in the collection and people more satisfied with browsing in their branches, because they're seeing that refresh of the collections over time. And we've already started getting reports of that, and especially in the small libraries where their collections were pretty stagnant because they just didn't have as much foot traffic in that branch. And they're already given feedback of like, wow, we're really excited about the large print collections really turned over. So I'm seeing something new when I come in 6 weeks or whatever, when I'm returning my other materials. So I'm already very hopeful.
That answered my next question, which was, are you already seeing results? And it sounds like you are.
Yeah, it has performed as expected. So when we went live in January, there was an initial increase in stuff that had to be moved and redistributed and moved around. And it's more kind of reaching its new normal now, where things are there. And so most of our shelves, we don't want them all the way 100% full, because things are coming and going. You need space to shelve. You need space to be able to find what you're looking for, all of that kind of stuff. And that's what we see across the district is like, yeah, this section remains about the same amount of material on the shelf, but yeah, it's new material. And we can see that data now and see how many items have been added to that section within a time period, how many have checked out of that section. So we get that kind of information and feedback. And
has any of the data surprised you yet?
Not me so much.
You would know. You would just know what to anticipate.
I mean, some of it, I think a lot of librarians know, like, what their communities are borrowing, what they're using, stuff, at least in a broad sense. You get a sense of, what's popular. Everybody knows cookbooks are popular, things like that. But this does provide some really good information. So one of the things that we can now provide to our selectors, you had talked previously about how we select material, is that IMMS will also show us items that maybe we need more copies of certain items. So they may not have a lot of hold requests on them, but they're checking out constantly from the shelves. And so IMMS can see the history there and say, to meet, and we define all the targets and parameters and everything, but to meet those targets, you need this many more copies of that item. And then the selectors can use their professional judgment and decide, do we actually need more copies of that? Is this, or where they want to put those dollars, and do we buy more of that book?
And it sounds like it has also made the opposite of that, the weeding component, more sophisticated or a little bit more efficient on our end.
Yeah. And you certainly see that with, previously staff really kind of looking at an item level. So I've got this book in my hand. How old is it? How many times has it gone out? Is it still current? All of these questions. What our guidelines are for collection development around it. So they're evaluating all of that. But really on that item level for the item they have in their hand. IMMS does title view. So it's looking at the performance of that title across the whole system.
However many copies of it there may be. Yeah.
So it can say, okay, we've got 10 copies of this, and over this period of time, this is how long those copies have been out for, how many times they've gone out for, all of those details about their performance and the demand for that. And so then it can identify out of all of those copies, if we do need to remove any, which copy is the one that should be removed. So this library has a surplus, it's going to be picked first. This copy is older, it's going to be picked first. This copy has circulated a lot, it's probably more worn out, it's going to be picked first.
And to be clear, what it does for the staff is put it on a weeding pull list on that app. So all they have to do is go pick that item up and put it in the tote for weeding. So that just eliminated a whole lot of brain power that they were having to decide constantly about different things with better information at that title level.
Yeah.
So,
and that process is so much simpler. Versus printing lists, shuffling all of that, going through
manually crossing off with the pen. Yes, I found this one. No, I didn't find this one, et cetera, et cetera.
And then going back to the computer to do processing of those items, because you weren't done just because you found it. So, and that's true of other lists like request for holds and all of those things. A lot of those processes now are just much more straightforward. It's just in the app, you pick the item, I found it, I didn't find it. With the weeding, they still have that option to use their judgment and say, I'm going to not pull this one right now. And so in a few months, we can look at it again.
So you're not just blindly following the will of the machine. As it were, there's still a human component to all of this.
Yeah, there's a human component all throughout it, because we define all those parameters, all those rules. It's not telling us, oh, you need to weed this because of whatever. Like, it's based on what information we give.
Right. It doesn't care about the content of the item specifically. No. Yeah.
So yeah, it's very much in our control, and the things we had done previously were steps, like Andrea said, towards this point.
We built different iterations, and we've gotten closer. Parts. And this is the closest for sure. Yeah.
Are there other libraries that have implemented this type of system?
Yeah, so this started in Denmark years ago. They were using it in a lot of their libraries, and then more recently it has come to the U.S. Some of the first libraries in the U.S. to use IMMS were Sacramento and Arapahoe. They are not on the same library system that we use, which is called Symphony. So we were the first library to go live, but Multnomah is the first to begin the integration work, and they worked with Cersei Dynix, our ILS provider, and with Linkso, the company that produces IMMS, to develop that integration with Symphony. But they're a much bigger system.
A lot of software names in there.
They just went live with theirs on the 6th of this month. So they've just gone live as well with theirs. But yeah, different setup there.
So pretty new to the public library world, all things considered.
Yep. Yeah, and there are numerous in Australia. They have systems in
New Zealand.
In Canada. There are now systems that do that as well. So, and there's a lot more in the U.S. that are going to be starting.
I'm actually, just to say this out loud, I mean, I'm really proud of Timberland for going with this, because we are kind of an early adopter to this, and we benefited from talking to those other library systems and finding out what their process was and what went well, what didn't go well. We benefited from talking to New Zealand about this, and I'm just like incredibly proud of our staff and of our work group being able to do this and pull it off.
It's really impressive. You mentioned being proud of staff, for pulling all of this off, and it's something that I am interested in this. So when we were actually working to implement this software, I was trying to follow along from the very beginning, and I haven't actively worked in a branch since 2021. And previously I felt pretty comfortable with all the circulation functions. So I did try to follow along with this, and then very quickly got lost, because it's just very different than what we used to do. The way we used to handle things when we were checking items in and shelving, this is a different world in a lot of ways. The processes are very different. The terminology is very different. And in the service of making a collection that has more items on the shelf that, are fresh and appealing, and we want items to be used, like the whole point of this is, we want what's in the collection to be something that people want to check out. Their books are made for use. But the amount of work that went into it, I'm really in awe of all of the frontline staff who have learned to do this and kept up with it and have been troubleshooting along the way. And it's just really impressive. I mean, I feel more distant from that day-to-day work than I ever have, because I couldn't just go into a branch myself personally and didn't pick it up, because it really is, it's a new environment. So kudos to all of them.
Yep, they've done great.
Well, it sounds like a lot of work. It also sounds like it's going to be helpful to staff. It's kind of like a win-win. It's going to be helpful to staff in maintaining the collection and the processes that they have. And it's also going to be really beneficial for patrons. And so I want to ask you, Andrea, specifically, what does it mean? Why is it important to you to have systems like this put in place for Timberland?
Yeah, I mean, I want our money to be used the most efficiently it can be used. And I want patrons to come in, people to come into our branches and be excited about what they find on those shelves. How do they have this attractive, interesting collection? We were a popular materials collection, as we've talked about in previous podcasts. And I just feel like this management of that floating aspect is the key, right? That they see new stuff all the time. It has been the one piece of feedback I've been given every year since I've worked here, is like, the small branches just feel like they don't get any new stuff. And so we've done different things over the years to help that with our Lucky Day collections and trying to fix that issue for those folks who really want a print item, not the digital item. So we've done a few things. And then this piece is the piece that's really giving them even more of a fresh collection. So they have a set shelf space for new books. So they're going to get refreshed new books. And we get to put in those parameters of how often do those things get refreshed for even on the branch level. So we can do it district wide, but we can do it down to the branch level. So these folks are going to get a better browsing experience. And if they haven't already realized it, that's definitely coming their way if they haven't seen it already. So come on into our libraries and tell me how much you love it, because that's what I want to hear.
Yep.
Yeah. And you shouldn't see empty shelves. Like if someone has checked out all the Apple books, well, that might be an empty shelf. Sorry about that. But in a subject area section, you will be getting more things filled back into that shelf as people come in and check out, 20, 30 items at a time in a section, So that problem, again, which was a problem we've had, is going away because now we're doing this piece. The inventory piece of that for the selectors is, oh, look, we really aren't buying enough of this. And we've gotten more detail now of what those kind of areas are. So having that information is really powerful. And I love the idea that we used to always do just a holds ratio. Like how many holds do we have on a thing? Oh, we should buy more of that. Well, now we're looking at, this is an item that may not be the most popular thing, but it is constantly searching. So let's add a few more copies in. That's a whole different, way of looking at it. So it's really exciting, personally, on many levels, of course.
And we've only just recently started with it as of January of this year.
That's right.
So in the coming years with IMMS, I know there's a lot of different, parameters and things you can tweak and stuff you can do with it. Are there any things that you're looking forward to, any ways of using it that we haven't implemented yet that you are looking forward to taking advantage of?
One of the things that we're just starting to do right now is a new display function in IMMS that makes it easy for staff to put things on display. And again, to tell the system, this is where it is. Again, we have other methods now that we use, but they're not as effective at that. And that's going to extend to like that new bookshelf management. There's a lot of processing that takes place to put things on the new bookshelf, take things off the new bookshelf, and IMMS can automate that for us.
As we have learned things over time and as we try new things out with IMMS, it's helping me to start really thinking about what will the direction of collection development be for these branches. Because in the past, shelf space dictated how much stuff you had. But with IMMS and filling in constantly, I'm not convinced that we need even more shelving anywhere, for example. Like in a branch like Olympia, we just did a little mini refresh, and especially of the kids area, they had a whole bunch of picture book city or the kids picture books shelving, and we cut that in half. And when we did that, what I think we did and what I'm seeing over time is that patrons are not overwhelmed by the size of that collection when they're in that kids space, and that things are filling in. So the dinosaur books, which was a collection that was very tiny at Olympia, has been filling in. I look at that specifically every time I go. That and the Go books in the kids section are very popular. There's a lot of
stuff, but less of what people want. It was the before, and now there's maybe less overall, but more of what people actually want.
Yeah, and it just makes that experience like less overwhelming. You're going to start seeing in our branches over time more displays in the collection because I want those books to really speak to people. I want it to be, we talk about being a bookstore experience, but think about how good you feel when you go in a bookstore and you just see those covers and they're so beautiful and you're like, oh, I'm so interested in this. And what I see when we do that in branches is people are constantly shopping those display shelves in the collection because they get interested just by seeing that title. Whereas if everything's just spine out because the shelves are so packed in full, it's just overwhelming and it's not as super fun to browse. And I'm a child of the 90s, and so browsing is just my thing. We would spend hours in bookstores and video stores, and not to say that's how people are today, but I do want things to speak to people, and I think that's been a real improvement that we are seeing.
I think people still are. Because one of the things that we see with our data constantly when it comes to the physical collection, although holds have a lot of demand and there's a lot of checkouts, it's still a third of what we circulate. So when it comes to the physical collection, most of it checks out from people browsing the shelves. It's not just holds.
Well, Andrea, from what you're saying, it seems like it all boils down to honestly patron experience, anyone's experience when they come into the library. And you like kind of light up when you talk about that and how positive of an experience you want that to be for people. And I think that's kind of what it all really boils down to, is it's about a better patron experience when they come into the library, when they're looking for materials. And that's what this, and kind of going back to how I started the episode on a very negative note of saying, where's all the books? And, you said obviously part of that is a higher demand for digital materials, but also IMMS should help with that. It should help with not only maybe bringing more books in where more books are needed, but bringing in the right materials, the materials that you want to see on your shelves that you are going to be more excited about and want to check out. So to make that a little bit more of a positive and not just a negative.
Yeah. And I wanted to chime in that in terms of how much we purchase for print over time, when I look at the last 10 to 15 years, that's only decreased by about 20,000 items. So we've been holding pretty steady at 120,000 items purchased year after year for the last few years. And it really hasn't decreased a whole ton. What you're seeing now is us being really methodical and thoughtful about the shape the material is in and what we're checking out to people. We don't want people to have a gross experience with materials. Wow. If things are, stained, wet, torn, falling apart on the spine, we're asking our staff to be a lot more methodical around, like, let's say, thank you for your service. Let's go and move that on. Because what I also hear from patrons a lot is how they don't like how gross that stuff is. And, I think about the, stickers on the spine label and how many stickers we had at one point, and people couldn't see even what the title of the book was on the spine, or the new book tape. I've always heard year after year that people hate the new book tape because they start to peel it off. And then, of course, you're picking up every kind of whatever is in someone's house or hand. So I'm always looking for a better patron experience. Don't want sticky stuff on books.
That's the moral of the story.
Yeah, I hate tape, by the way. If you didn't know that about me. So, just trying to make that, people, they deserve a clean, good collection. And that's what we always work towards, that great patron experience.
I like it when I hear it described as a healthy collection.
Yes.
I think that's a good word for it, a healthy. Mm-hmm. Well, Andrea, is there anything that we didn't include today that you were hoping to talk about?
The other thing we'd want to include is to talk about how, what we've done with our collection is a response to usage patterns. So when we have looked at that, our digital collection circs are surpassing our print, then of course we're investing money and trying to be mindful about that. That's not to say that all of our money is going to digital collections. They have a whole nother set of complications. And we also have to balance the different types of users, people who are opposed to using anything online. We totally respect that. And that's why we have a print collection still. So we're balancing all those needs constantly. We're looking at the total expenditures we want to expend on print versus digital items and being very mindful of all of that and trying to balance that across 5 counties and 29 libraries. So there's a lot of thought and a lot of analysis that goes into why we do the things we do. Mm-hmm. And our print collection has, while it has physically diminished over time because of we want people to have nice things that are not dirty or falling apart, our electronic collection has filled in that gap, basically. So we are about the same collection size as we've always been, but that has transitioned to half digital, half print, basically, at this point in time, which I think is really interesting. All based on usage patterns. So our patrons tell us when they check things in and out, or if they don't check them in and out, what they want. So we have that just base information that we can always work from as well when we think about budgets and expenditures. Yeah.
We don't get a chance to just hear from the future predictor of the library world very often. So Ryan, is there anything IMMS related or not that you see happening to libraries in the next 10 years optimistically?
Oh my gosh.
You got
That's
to be
a whole other episode.
You got to be optimistic. Oh, you just got to pick one thing, right? We can have you back for another episode if it comes to it. But as someone who's a strategic thinker, what's on the horizon?
There's a lot going on in the world right now. So yeah, the optimism part is always a challenge sometimes. Yes. But really, when we look at it, the thing that always makes me happy is people still love to read. And they love to read how they love to read. If they want print, if they want ebook, if they want audiobooks on CD or download, I don't see that suddenly disappearing. Where we run into challenges are around decisions, like what publishers decide to do. And you've talked about ebook pricing, for example, in the past. So we run into those challenges, but for the public, for them coming into our library, they still should be expecting to find the things that they're looking for and the access to information that they're looking for. Like, that's our goal, is in a lot of this, like, the library nerd likes to know how things work, but for the patron, it should be kind of invisible. They come in, they have a great experience. It's a nice, clean, healthy environment. The materials are cool. They're excited to get things. Like, that existed, hopefully, when I started, and continues to be a thing. And so I don't see that going away. Will it change? Who knows? We have the competition now, like with movies, between streaming and physical media. Decisions that those companies make. Do they release it on physical media? If they don't, that makes it a lot harder for us to offer that to our patrons. So some of that's out of our hands when it comes to that.
Well, we're veering a little bit too far from the optimism, so we'll leave it there. End on a happy note. Well, thank you both for being here. Hopefully we did a good job of taking a somewhat complicated piece of software and its reason for being and translating that into common language that people can understand. And if we didn't do a good job of that, that's on me and not on you. And people can let us know at, TRL Podcast at TRL.org or whatever the email address is. Do you remember?
Yes. TRL Podcast at TRL.org.
That's right.
Or not. It's fine.
No, I want to know if I'm terrible.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode. Don't forget to follow or subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback helps us improve and reach more listeners.
You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Timberland Library. If you have any questions or comments, you can email us at trlpodcast@trl.org.
Original music is by our very own librarian and talented musician, Stefan, at the Yelm Branch.
Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep the conversation going. Thank you for being a part of the TRL community.